There are 12 items sitting on Dollar Tree shelves right now that are priced wrong, and I don't mean wrong in a bad way for you. I mean wrong in a way that's actually a mistake in the store's favor to lose money and in your favor to save it. Somewhere between the warehouse, the pricing system, and the shelf, these items slipped through at prices that don't match what they actually cost to make. And once corporate catches on, which eventually happens with pricing errors like this, they get quietly corrected. So if you want to grab these while the mistake is still live, you're going to want to watch this entire list, because number 11 is the one that honestly shouldn't even be legal to sell this cheap. If you're new here, this channel is all about finding the real value hiding inside Dollar Tree, the stuff most people scroll right past without realizing what they're looking at. So if that's useful to you, go ahead and hit subscribe before we get into it, because pricing mistakes like this get fixed fast, and I want you to be one of the first people to know about the next one. Before we start, I want to explain quickly how a pricing error like this even happens at a company this size, because it's not as random as it sounds. Every product that goes into a store like Dollar Tree gets assigned a price point based on cost projections that are calculated months, sometimes even a full year, in advance. Buyers negotiate with manufacturers, lock in a price, and set the shelf tag based on what the cost is supposed to be at the time of launch. The problem is that raw material costs, shipping rates, and manufacturing expenses shift constantly in the real world, and sometimes those shifts happen faster than the pricing system can catch up. When that happens, an item can end up sitting on the shelf at a price that made sense 8 months ago but doesn't match reality anymore. That's not a marketing strategy, that's a genuine gap between what was planned and what's actually happening, and it's exactly what's going on with the 12 items on this list. One more thing before we jump in. I'm not telling you to panic buy or clear a shelf. I'm telling you that if you were already planning to buy any of these, now is a smarter time than most to do it, because a price correction on any of these items is realistically a matter of time, not a maybe. All right, let's get into it. Number 1, the insulated stainless steel tumblers. These have been showing up in more stores over the past few months, and at the price they're currently tagged, they genuinely should not be there. Stainless steel has gone up significantly in cost over the last 2 years due to global manufacturing demand, and insulated double-wall tumblers require more material and more labor to produce than a basic single-wall cup. Similar tumblers from other budget retailers are priced 2 to 3 times higher for a nearly identical product. The going theory among people who track pricing closely is that this item was locked into its price point before the last steel cost increase hit, and it simply hasn't been adjusted yet. Grab a couple if you see them, because tumblers like this are usually one of the first items corrected once someone at corporate notices the gap between cost and price. Drinkware in general tends to get reviewed fairly often since it's a high turnover category, which means the window on this particular item is likely shorter than some of the others on this list. So if you've been thinking about grabbing one, sooner is genuinely better than later here. Number 2, the multi-pack kitchen towels. This one is subtle, but once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Cotton and cotton blend fabric pricing has been volatile for a while now, and a multi-pack of absorbent kitchen towels, especially ones with any kind of printed pattern, typically costs more to produce than a plain single towel. When you compare the per towel cost here to what similar packs sell for elsewhere, the math genuinely doesn't add up in the store's favor. These get restocked in waves, so if you use kitchen towels regularly, this is one of those categories worth grabbing a few extra of, while the pricing hasn't caught up yet. Number 3, the battery-operated LED string lights. Small electronics like this usually carry a noticeable markup because of the components inside them, even at a dollar store. LED lights, a battery compartment, and a functioning switch all have to be manufactured and safety tested, and that adds cost that most people don't think about when they see a string of lights sitting in a bin. The current price on these doesn't reflect the actual component cost, especially compared to nearly identical string lights sold at other retailers for 3 to 5 times more. This is another one of those categories where the pricing appears to be running behind the actual cost of production. Seasonal decor and lighting also tend to sit through longer review cycles than everyday essentials, partly because buyers assume the category will naturally rotate out on its own once the season ends, which means a gap like this can realistically stick around longer than some of the more actively monitored categories on this list. Number 4. The ceramic coffee mugs with double wall insulation. Regular ceramic mugs make sense at a low price point, but the double wall insulated version is a different manufacturing process entirely, requiring more material and more careful quality control to prevent cracking during the insulation process. Finding these priced the same as a basic single wall mug is unusual, and it strongly suggests this specific item hasn't gone through a price review since it was first added to the lineup. If you drink coffee daily and want something that actually keeps your drink hot longer, this is one of the strongest mismatches on this entire list. Number 5. The heavy-duty storage bins with locking lids. Plastic resin pricing has fluctuated a lot over the past couple of years, and a bin with a locking mechanism requires more plastic and more precise molding than a basic open-top bin. When you pick one of these up, the weight alone tells you it's using more material than the price tag would suggest. Compared to locking storage bins at other stores, which often run $3 to $4 minimum, this is priced like it's still using an older, cheaper resin cost that hasn't been the reality for a while now. If you do any kind of home organizing, garage storage, or seasonal decoration packing, this is one of the more practical items on the entire list to stock up on, simply because the material cost gap here is large enough that a correction, when it happens, is likely to be noticeable rather than subtle. Number 6. The rechargeable hand warmers. These became more popular over the last couple of winters, and the technology inside them, a small internal battery and heating element, is genuinely more complex than most items at this price point. Rechargeable electronics with a heating function usually carry a premium because of the safety testing required, and finding one priced this low suggests the cost calculation behind it was done before the component prices shifted. If you deal with cold hands during winter, this is one of the more useful pricing gaps on this list to take advantage of. Number 7. The set of ceramic knives with sheaths. Ceramic blades require a completely different manufacturing process than standard steel kitchen knives, involving high-heat kilns and precision grinding to get a usable edge. That process is genuinely more expensive than stamping out a basic steel blade, which is why ceramic knives almost always cost more everywhere else you'd find them. Seeing a full set with protective sheaths at this price point is one of the clearer signs that whoever set this price wasn't accounting for the true cost difference between ceramic and standard steel production. Kitchenware categories like this one often get grouped together during pricing reviews, which means once someone flags this specific item, similar tools nearby on the shelf may get a second look too, so it's worth checking the surrounding section while you're there. Number 8. The heavy cast iron style skillets, the ones that mimic traditional cast iron cookware. Even when these are made from a cast iron alternative material to keep weight and cost down, the molding process still requires more raw material and more energy to produce than typical dollar store cookware. Comparable skillets at other retailers, even budget ones, tend to start at $4 or $5 minimum. Finding one at this price point is a strong indicator that this item is priced based on outdated production costs rather than current ones. Number 9. The multi-tool pocket knives with multiple folding attachments. Multi-tools require more moving parts, more precise assembly, and more quality control than a basic single-blade knife. all of which add labor costs to the manufacturing process. When you compare the number of functions packed into this specific item against similar multi-tools sold at hardware stores for $8 to $10, the gap here is hard to explain any other way besides an outdated cost calculation still sitting in the system. Tools like this also tend to have longer shelf lives once stocked, since they're not seasonal and don't expire, which means if you miss this particular pricing window, there's a reasonable chance a similar tool item shows up again down the line with its own gap. Number 10. The set of wireless doorbell chimes. Small wireless electronics like this involve radio components, a receiver, and a transmitter, all of which need to be manufactured to a certain safety and reliability standard. Products in this category are rarely found below $8 or $10 anywhere else, which makes this one of the more surprising pricing gaps on the entire list. If your current doorbell setup needs an upgrade, or you're doing a simple home project, this is worth grabbing before the price catches up to where it should realistically be. And number 11, the one I mentioned at the very start of this video, the one that honestly shouldn't be this cheap. The compact power banks with a built-in charging cable. A power bank contains a lithium battery, internal circuitry to regulate charging speed and prevent overheating, and in this case, a built-in cable, all of which require serious safety certification before they're even allowed on a shelf. Lithium battery products are some of the most heavily regulated small electronics sold in retail, specifically because of fire risk if the internal components aren't manufactured to spec. Comparable power banks with a built-in cable typically sell for $12 to $20 at other stores, sometimes more depending on the capacity. Finding one at this price point isn't just a pricing gap, it's close to the biggest mismatch between cost and shelf price on this entire list, and it's exactly the kind of item that tends to get corrected the moment someone in pricing actually reviews the electronics category closely. If you use portable chargers at all, this is the one item on this list I would genuinely prioritize grabbing before that correction happens. Given how heavily regulated lithium battery products are and how closely retailers typically monitor the cost of anything involving a rechargeable battery, this is also the item on the entire list most likely to get flagged and corrected first, simply because it carries the most safety and compliance oversight of anything we've covered so far. And finally, number 12, the insulated lunch bags with a hard shell front panel. Most insulated lunch bags on the market use soft fabric throughout, but this version includes a molded hard shell panel on the front to protect contents from getting crushed. That hard shell component requires injection molding in addition to the standard fabric assembly, which is a manufacturing step most lunch bags at this price point skip entirely. Similar hybrid lunch bags at other retailers commonly sell in the $15 to $20 range. This is one of the newer additions to the lineup, and newer items are actually more likely to have pricing errors like this, simply because there's been less time for anyone to review the cost data against the shelf price. So here's what's actually going on behind all 12 of these. Pricing at a company this size isn't done item by item in real time. It's done in large batches, reviewed on a schedule, and updated based on cost reports that come in periodically rather than instantly. That means there's always a window, sometimes a few weeks, sometimes several months, where an item's shelf price is based on outdated cost information. Most of the time, that gap is small enough that nobody notices or bothers to correct it quickly. But every once in a while, a handful of items end up with a bigger gap than usual, either because a raw material spiked unexpectedly or because a product moved into a higher cost category without the pricing system catching up. That's exactly the situation with the 12 items we just went through. This kind of pricing lag isn't unique to Dollar Tree either, and understanding that context makes the whole thing easier to trust rather than dismiss as some kind of conspiracy theory. Every large retailer deals with this same lag between real-world cost changes and shelf price updates, because none of them are physically capable of repricing every single item the moment a supplier invoice changes. Grocery chains deal with it constantly with produce and dairy, where wholesale costs shift week to week, but shelf prices are typically locked in for longer stretches. Big box electronics retailers deal with it when component costs for things like batteries or chips spike due to global supply issues, and the shelf price takes weeks or months to reflect that change. The difference at a place like Dollar Tree is that the gap is more visible because almost the entire store sits at one fixed price point, or close to it, which means any item that's meaningfully more expensive to produce than that fixed price stands out clearly once you know what to look for, instead of blending into a wall of varying price tags the way it would somewhere else. It's also worth pointing out that this is exactly why more expensive product categories, like the electronics on this list, tend to rotate in and out of the lineup more unpredictably than basic household goods. A plastic storage bin or a ceramic mug has a fairly stable, predictable production cost that doesn't shift dramatically month to month. But something like a power bank or a set of wireless chimes depends on global electronics component pricing, which can swing significantly based on chip shortages, shipping delays, or raw material costs for things like lithium and copper. That volatility is exactly why these categories are the ones most likely to slip out of sync with their shelf price, and also why, once corrected, they tend to jump in price more noticeably than something like a kitchen towel would. It's also worth understanding why these corrections don't happen overnight, even once someone does notice. Changing a price on a physical shelf tag across thousands of store locations takes coordination, printing, and logistics. It's not as simple as updating a number in a spreadsheet. Corporate pricing teams typically batch these corrections together and roll them out during scheduled reset periods, rather than making one-off changes store by store. That's the window you're working with here. It's not permanent, but it's also not something that gets fixed within a day or two of being noticed. This is also why you'll sometimes notice an item you loved buying suddenly jump in price seemingly overnight, or disappear for a few weeks before coming back at a different price point entirely. That's usually not a random decision. That's a correction catching up to reality after running behind for a while. If you've ever wondered why a specific product you used to buy regularly suddenly cost more without any real explanation, this pricing lag is very often the actual reason behind it. So what should you actually do with this information as a shopper? Honestly, the smartest move is simple. If any of these 12 items are things you genuinely use or need anyway, this is a better time than most to grab them, specifically because you're buying at a price that doesn't reflect the real cost behind the product. You're not doing anything wrong by taking advantage of that. Retailers factor in a certain amount of this kind of gap into their overall numbers, and it evens out across thousands of other products that are priced correctly or even priced higher than they need to be. A few practical tips if you want to make the most of this. First, prioritize the items with more complex manufacturing, like the power bank and the doorbell chimes, since electronics tend to get reviewed and corrected fastest once someone notices the gap. Second, don't assume these prices will last through your next shopping trip, especially if you're watching this a few weeks after it was posted, since some of these may have already been corrected by the time you're seeing this. And third, if you do see one of these get marked up during a future visit, that's actually confirmation that the pricing gap was real, and it's a good sign to watch closely for the next batch of pricing mismatches, because they do happen again. A fourth tip worth mentioning, if you're someone who likes to plan ahead, is to check back on this specific list of categories every couple of months, rather than assuming today's mismatches are the only ones that will ever exist. Electronics, cookware with unusual manufacturing processes, and anything involving batteries or moving parts are consistently the categories most likely to develop a new pricing gap, simply because their underlying costs are the most volatile of anything sold in the store. If you make a habit of paying closer attention specifically to those categories rather than the entire store at once, you'll have a much easier time spotting the next mismatch before everyone else does, and often before the correction even happens. It's also worth being realistic about how long a window like this typically lasts. Based on how these things have played out in similar categories in the past, some of these corrections happen within a matter of weeks, especially for the more obvious electronics gaps, while others linger for several months if nobody flags them internally right away. That means if you're watching this shortly after it was posted, you're likely seeing the freshest version of this list, and your odds of catching these before a correction are about as good as they're going to get. If you're watching this later, it's still worth a trip to check, because even if a few of these have already been corrected, pricing gaps like this rarely happen in isolation, and there's a good chance something new has slipped through in the meantime that fits this exact same pattern. And once you start noticing this pattern, you'll probably start looking at every shelf a little differently. Not every low price is a mistake. Most of them are completely intentional, calculated, and exactly where the company wants them to be. But a small handful, scattered across categories like electronics, cookware, and specialty items, are genuinely running behind on cost updates, and those are the ones worth paying closer attention to before the correction catches up. If you found this breakdown helpful, let me know in the comments which one of these 12 you're planning to grab first, because for me, it's the power bank without a doubt. That price to functionality gap is honestly the biggest one on this entire list. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it when the next pricing mismatch shows up, because these do get discovered again every few months, and I want you to be one of the first people who knows about it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.